Welcome back, everybody, to the School Leadership Show. I'm Mike Doughty, and in this special episode, I'm sharing a session from a really cool professional learning event that we held between Albany, New York, with the Capital Region BOCES in Narek, and Putnam, Northern Westchester BOCES in Yorktown Heights on October 28th. And we worked in partnership with NYSCATE. And this event was all about empowering all learners and looking at how technology can support every single student that we have. So during the event, I was joined by Christy Bezrutczyk as we explored how technology and AI are influencing the developing student brain, from the effects of screen time and blue light to the growing role of AI in education. So let's dive into this session and uncover how we can use technology more purposefully while keeping human connection at the center of learning.
I often think about things that I either learned in college or believed to be the gospel truth during the early part of my career and how they're no longer a thing. Like Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. I think I was asked about that in my first teacher interview. It's not really a thing. So I think, it's interesting how this type, what we think we know about education and how it changes over time in terms of student learning. So you've been digging into the neuroscience. Where are we?
So brain science, it's developing every day. There's new research coming out. That's why it's been so hard and trying to complete my dissertation, because I keep adding. But what we've learned is that the actual architecture, the shape of our brains in young children is actually incredibly different than how our brain developed. And that's due to many reasons. So knowing that the architecture of their brain has changed, we also recognize that the way that we teach young children, we have to change along with that. It's not the same as what we learned 30 years ago.
Okay, so when you say the architecture of hold the mic closer to when you say the architecture of the brain has changed, what exactly do you mean? Like, it can't have evolved in the last 30 years. So what's different?
Well, when we learned about the brain, we know that the neural pathways, the more they fire together, they wire together, and that our brain is naturally pruning, right? We know all of this. What we've discovered is that there are higher rates of cortisol in the brain now for young children, and they get lots of hits of dopamine, especially when they're looking at screens, which takes out the part of the auditory part of the brain. So they're getting a lot of visual input. That's wiring together, but again, at the expense of other senses. So it's not developing. We know the brain develops from the back to the front, and it's not developing in the same way. Those neural pathways that are firing together and wiring together are doing that at the expense of other parts of the brain while it's developing.
Right. So it isn't necessarily about our brains changing. It's how our brains are developing in response to changes in stimuli.
Yes.
Okay. So talk about, I think we kind of know where those changes in stimuli are coming from when you think about Jonathan Haidt's work with the anxious generation and access to technology. So what is the access to technology 24/7 doing to kids' brains? You mentioned the more visual stimulation, which is interesting because when I think about my deaf kids, I wonder if that's helping them in some way because they are getting more access to visual content that they might have before, but probably not. But don't ignore that part, but talk more generally about what this means for the vast majority of our kids in K-12.
So when they're getting these dopamine hits, because there's so much light, and the light that's coming into their brain is actually messing up the circadian rhythm. We shouldn't even be looking at that kind of light after 12 o'clock in the afternoon, right? Because the sun starts setting, and that is what helps our brain and our circadian rhythm come back into a normal rhythm.
Let's just pull that thread a little bit so everybody knows. When we talk about blue light, if you think about when we were living in caves, what was the signal to early human beings that it was time to be awake? Like the blue sky, right? Like the blue light. So when that blue light is in your face all the time, it's telling your brain not to release melatonin, which is what helps you sleep. So like that's this when we talk about blue light, there's a little bit more under there than just, oh, it's light.
It's that specific light that comes from our screens, and that's a phone, a laptop, a television. What's happening though, when we're looking at screens on a laptop, a tablet, or our phones, we're much closer than 30 years ago when we were watching TV that was further away.
And we had to get up to change the channel.
You did. There was a little bit more movement involved. Right. So that sedentary sitting and posturing, that's also changing a lot. It's changing our sensory regulation system. When we were, again, going back to being younger, our bodies moved in a lot of different ways versus our kids today. So I'm just going to jump in really quick and say our young children should be having about 90 to 120 minutes of physical exercise, like increased heart rate a day. And how many children do you think in your rooms and that are getting? We did as children, because we went outside until the streetlights came on. We didn't have a choice. But our young children today aren't getting that same kind of sensory input.
All right. So
I went on a tangent. Sorry.
I love it. So then what are we supposed to do, I guess, if this is the way things are? And I would kind of look at it. I think we have a generation of kids. So I think people who are in their mid to late 20s and may have gone through K-12 sort of before smartphones were a huge thing and I'm almost thinking like kids who are like preteens to like early 20s now is that group of kids that had the unfettered access where nobody knew what was going on and we just let them have at it. And then now I see parents with younger children much more tuned into reducing screen time, keeping kids off devices. So I feel some hope, like this next, we've got a bubble going through that maybe their parents didn't figure it out, but behind them, we might be okay. After them, we might be okay. That middle chunk, like how do we deal with those kids?
Great question. I think we have to look at this through a couple of different lenses. So the children who had that kind of uninterrupted time on a screen, we know, and so it's called the HERO study with Harvard University. It's the Health and Early Roots and Origins study where we look at the children's brains, a little bit about what I was talking about before with the cortisol and the dopamine hits.
Do it fMRI? How do you look at their brains?
So what we did was we took buccal swab samples and I took hair samples, and then I did an executive functioning test through a program that was developed out in Minnesota. And then we sent those over to McGill University, and then they were able to look at the data. And what we found was, and we're actually moving into another phase, it's called phase 4 for the HERO study. What we found is that children's brains are actually looking older today than they were before because of it's what the cortisol does to the brain. And we measure that stress through the telomeres on a hair sample, so we can actually see how long the stress has been there. But the goal would be something along the lines of like, when we were kids, we had to do, like when we were tested for lead, like that was a whole big process. And now we just do this finger pick and it's done. We would love, and that's what Harvard University is trying to do, just to do this maybe finger prick or like a saliva sample, process it in the office, and we can tell how the brain is developing. If there is a stress response, how we can strengthen that part of the brain. Now,
so potentially you could get some sort of metric that indicated almost brain age based on cortisol.
Yes. The epigenetic clock is fascinating work.
But it wouldn't necessarily tell you. That would be more correlation to causation, right? Because you wouldn't know what the cortisol was from. I mean, you would be asking questions, right? And trying to get at it. So what does that do? So a kid is constant cortisol. And I think about, but you think about when they show like the pictures of people who become president, like when they become president, and then 4 or 8 years later, how much they've aged, right? And they say it's the stress of the job. So I think about that on, a fully formed, in all our cases, adult men, right? Versus a child whose brain is still malleable.
Okay.
So what is the effect of those increases in cortisol and constant access to dopamine hits?
So it ends up making the brain less plastic, right? So that plasticity in our brain is what makes it malleable. And these repeated hits of dopamine reduce that plasticity in the brain and increase pruning, because again, those wires or those, that input is making those neural pathways wire together. Again, pruning may be less used neural pathways from when we were younger, say, and we were rolling down a hill or drinking out of the neighbor's hose. Like those neural pathways are not firing and wiring together. Does that make sense?
So from a technology perspective, I often thought about this as a principal when I was a principal, because people would come in and, be complaining about kids, what's going on at home, the parents don't respond, all this other stuff. And I'd be, every conversation would have the same way. I'd be like, yep, you're right. We can't control those things, but we can control what happens when the kid's here. So what are the things that are within our control that we can leverage to mitigate the effects of this? And I think we've taken a huge leap forward. Who thought I would get here to say and sit here and say, hey, Governor Hochul, good job. But the cell phone ban, for no joke, it gave everybody air cover to be able to do it, because there were very few districts who, where the superintendent had the capital to do a cell phone ban before it was required by law. So, we had a couple in this region went 2 or 3 years ago, and to the person, you can't find anybody to say something negative about a cell phone ban, right? Like they're all like, they had bumps a little bit at the beginning, but now pretty much once people do it, like they're in, they love it. So what have you heard about that stuff so far? We're starting to see a little bit of data leak out. I saw something, I don't know if it was New York Times or Good Morning America earlier in the week, about cell phone bans and how we're like a little bit into the school year where this has happened. It's a great natural experiment, right? It's going on some places and not others. So what have you heard about that and its effect? And then what's next? Because I feel like this is just the first thing. So,
well, I think like if we could compare it to when I'm trying to think of something that was like a big boom, maybe when DVDs came out, right? And there was this big rush. Everybody got super excited, and then it kind of lulls, right? But there's all these new machines that are out, all these great movies, this great quality. So when we're thinking about technology and our young kids today, right, the boom has happened. And now we need to work together. I think as a community, this is one great strategy to do the cell phone ban. What can we expect next? I think we need to, as a generation, model what we want for our kids, right? And that's one of the biggest downfalls, is that we're on our phones, we're on our laptops. My email goes to my phone, and adults are having a hard time regulating. So if we're having a hard time regulating with a fully developed brain, right? Anybody over 27 to 30 years old is supposed to have this fully developed brain now in our prefrontal cortex. How are
except for men, it's like 35, isn't it?
That's questionable.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're context dependent.
So I think what's next is that we need to work together as a community, and instead of just responding to like problems with technology, we need to figure out how we can integrate it in a smoother way. Like in my classroom at the college, I allow cell phones and I say, get your phone out and let's look this up. Like I try to use it as much as possible. But then other times when we have a speaker and I see everybody has their screens open, I say, okay, we got to put our cell phones down, shut your laptops. And it's just that reminder, but they do it. It's not like a punishment thing, but how can you, we know we're not good at multitasking. We know that, right? Like if we try to focus our energy on one thing and do something else, something suffers. It's not our best work. So I think it's like having those conversations, how we can use it, integrate it into our lives in a healthy way, right?
Well, and I think purposeful way too. And that, if you think about what we do in education, and even often as adults when we interact with children, we are substituting our judgment for their lack of judgment, right? So sometimes it's okay for us to tell them, nope, this is the time to put your laptops and screens away because you don't multitask well, and I want you to pay attention to what's going on, right?
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Where was I going? I had a really fun place to go next, but I completely lost it.
My brain
just went away.
Yep.
Oh, so we talked this morning with Chris and Carolee up here about, the potential positive impacts of artificial intelligence, at least in terms on, I think, eliminating some of the drudgery when it comes to the work that teachers have to do. I think of planning, I think of preparation. I think some of those early lessons that I taught for observations in the late 20th century, I spent hours aligning it to the standards. What a waste of my time, when I could have been spending that time thinking about how I was going to engage Jimmy, who never listened to a thing I said, right? If I could put my energy there in terms of designing experiences that engage students in things that are uniquely human without screens, maybe that would help.
Without screens?
Yeah. Or with screens, in a purposeful way.
In a purposeful way, yes. I think technology can certainly help our teachers, right? We're in a national teacher shortage, so that can eliminate some of that like work that is tedious. AI can also help us create lessons that are fantastic. I think one thing we need to be mindful of is that AI has inherent biases, right? And who creates the AI? It's not a diverse population that's creating the code for artificial intelligence. It's likely a male, and that male is likely white.
I like to stay stale, male, and pale. Okay. Male and white, right?
Right.
That's kind of it. Okay, sorry.
No.
Autobiographical.
No, I'm like doing an acronym in my head so I don't forget. So when we're thinking about using AI to help us with our lessons or helping with grading, we just need to keep that in the back of our mind where that information is coming from. But I think it would help, like having those kiddos who are having a really hard time connecting to the content. We can come up with some fabulous stuff. So we just did this over at the college. We have the students obviously in the education program write lessons, and we asked them to use artificial intelligence. And I will say one of the kind of things that came out that was wrong was DAP, like developmentally appropriate practice. AI didn't do so great with that, which was surprising. They had the right textbooks, but I think that's because that's kind of a plug and play, right? Like this textbook's for a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old. But as far as developmentally appropriate practice, it was not spot on. So what does that teach us though? This is where I was going. Instead of having that external locus of control telling us as educators and our students and our children, this external locus of control, I think our kids and a lot of teachers and adults who rely on AI maybe too much aren't using that internal locus of control, like those checks and balances. We just take something from the internet and think, yep, this is right. Just like on social media for a long time, right? People see the social media post and they're like, oh my gosh, there's bears blocking the entrance of Yosemite Park. And it looks real, right? Like it looks like bears are there, but it's not. So when we get these lesson plans that have NYS, the standards, all of these little acronyms, we're thinking, oh, this is legit. That's our job to check, right? And once we start doing that as adults, I think then the next generation of children will understand you can't just take it at face value. You have to do your own investigation.
Yeah.
But
here's what you're worried about that. So that's fine for the people sitting in this room. Like we know, we put the prompt in, mess around with it. We can tell, hopefully, if something that comes out of there is good or it's garbage. What happens to the kids who are coming out of graduate school certified as teachers now, who don't have the background we do, and they might be taking at face value what comes out of that AI? How do we mitigate the brain drain, I guess, is the question. That's a big one.
That is a big
one. It's a little out of your scope, but have at it.
Yeah, I think that's a tough one because especially the new graduates grew up with this technology. I do think so, and maybe this is not accurate, but I feel like the new graduates kind of know the pros and cons of artificial intelligence. I think they know not to trust it. Although I will say some assignments they turn in, you can tell are just generated and then not even read. It is a good question. I don't know how we let somebody, like 30 years ago, would you turn in a lesson plan or a letter without reading it like 50 times? And we get, right? Because it's just embarrassing that your name's on it, right? If there's a mistake. I don't know if that is inherently in our students today, like it was for us.
Yeah, I was having this conversation with one of my friends who's been teaching high school Spanish for 30 years. And I said, aren't you like worried about this, like with what they're doing? And she said, nah, everybody flipped out when Google Translate came out, like that was going to kill foreign language instruction. And she goes, if I want to know if a kid can do something, I make them do it in front of me. And then, right? You wrote this paper. I explain to me what it's about.
So that's a great point too. So I brought in my meta classes last semester, teaching a curriculum class. A lot of the students hadn't seen them before. Some of the staff at the college were like, you can't bring those into the classroom. And I was like, well, why not? I think this could be a tool.
I mean, it is higher ed, right? Yeah. You still use chalk, don't you?
Yes.
Sorry.
So
present company excluded.
Part of our assignment in that course, like it was a curriculum and instruction course, was to read this article and then ask 3 higher level questions using like the Socratic seminar. So I put the glasses on, looked at the cover page of the article, and I said, give me 3 questions for my Socratic seminar and make them leveled questions, leveled 1, level 2, level 3. The glasses kicked it out. I had 3 beautiful questions. I had an entire summary of what this article that was like 17 pages was about, a peer-reviewed article. And so I showed this information to my students. And I said, now you do it. You take an article, because we assigned articles every week, and you come up with some Socratic seminar questions. So that got us started. But then the conversation after, you could tell if the students read the information, understood the information. That was, like you said, get up and show me what you know.
I think, does anybody remember going through training to learn how to write essential questions to do that? Okay, you're smiling because I don't know what, I hit a block. Like that was hard for me. I felt like when I would do it, I would be like, hey, how about this one? I'd be like, no, that's terrible. Okay. But I have messed around with a couple of the different models asking, even to ask for a lesson plan, but asking about essential questions for a particular, standard or whatever. And they're pretty good. Like that'll come out of there where I at least can look at it and be like, that's a good essential question that I might have been able to come up with on my own if I would shedded it for a long time, but
right.
I don't want to do that.
Yeah. No, I agree. One of the things that I just used AI for recently was I opened up a second LLC. This is the first time, and I had to file my taxes without owning a business last year, so I didn't like that very much. So I put into AI, this is the business I want to open. Tell me the steps to do it. And I want to add tech because I don't have a tech-based business. It created QR codes for me with behavioral interventions, recommended like a deck of cards, not playing cards, but like a deck of cards to help parents, or it had a QR. Like it was amazing. So it's called Connecting Before Directing LLC, and it'll be out soon. But I mean, it's fascinating how it came up with every step. Here's the link to New York State's, all the steps of opening a business.
Well, and
it was incredible.
Right. And think about, I guess I would think about the evolution of that type of process. So if you wanted to do that 30 years ago,
I did.
Right. What'd you do then? I talked to people, called a lawyer,
go to the legislative office. You had to have a meeting. Yeah. Our attorneys were involved.
And then maybe, I don't know, 10 or 15 years later, you could have looked up some of that stuff on the internet,
right.
in the Google, maybe. Then maybe a couple years later, I think about whenever I don't know how to do something, I just go onto YouTube and have somebody show me how to do it on a video. Like we've been doing that for the last 5 or 10 years. Is this not just the next evolution of that? Like my virtual assistant there is going to help me now do an LLC, and it'll be just a little bit easier, a lot easier than it was before because the technology's caught up.
Right. So instead of us using like the Encyclopedia Britannica, it is on a screen in front of us. And instead of us flipping through the pages flip for us.
Right. And then we get what we need. And it's almost like if you consider search and where that has gone, because I would argue search has gotten worse over the last 10 years or so, right? Like anybody like to cook? So you put in the recipe and that lie that is jump to recipe.
Yes.
Yeah. Jump to recipe is scroll through a million ads. And is there some reason we can't put the ingredients near the steps? Like, why do they have to be in different places? Okay. So, but you do the same thing in a large language model and you're going to get exactly what you want. So I think AI is moving search into getting what you want versus here's a list of more stuff to go look at.
So, and I think this is maybe one of the caveats of AI, right? Like not having to look at stuff that maybe you don't need. That's the stuff that got us to be great problem solvers. It got us to take risks because we saw something we're like, can I jump over that bridge without, you know what I mean? Look,
well, when we think about, that's an interesting point. I mean, consider that one, because when you think about executive functioning and the ability to persist through productive struggle, well, wait a minute, how's that going to go? Like, how do we make sure that the kids develop that set of skills if when they go to use the technology support, it's just right there?
I think that's one of the inherent, I think, difficulties that we're going to have with AI.
So where should people be putting their energy? I've heard a lot of people say, if you're not using AI, I heard one person at a conference this past week say, if you're not using it 100 times a day, then you're just tinkering around the edges. But that seemed excessive. So where should people be putting their energy? Is it learning how to prompt better? Is it thinking about pedagogy? Is it thinking about engagement? Is it everything? Like, what should we be doing? Because my suspicion is what we should be doing is probably not focusing on writing lesson plans.
I think even though AI is newer and it does seem like the shiny thing in the room, I don't think we've changed that much as human beings. And I think our focus needs to go to self-care, connectedness with our peers, loved ones, and friends, making sure that we're taking time to take care of ourselves. That's the first and foremost. If we're not healthy, like mentally well, going into AI is going to be a lot harder for some people versus people who are mentally well, have those great buffers and connections. They're going to be able to limit, and our brain will be able to say, you know what, that's enough. I just went down a rabbit hole for an hour and a half on TikTok. If you're not mentally well, it's really hard to put that kind of time limit on yourself. I think that's where we need to focus. But that's been the same for how many hundreds of years? We're humans. We need social connection, not a screen.
And that really hasn't changed over time when you think about it. If you think about technology, you can kind of liken it almost to mind-altering substances, right? That when you get more of it, it just makes you more and a more intense version of who you already are, right? Think about that. So if you're not a great person and we give you access to AI where you can create stuff really easily, now you're just a bad person who can make bad stuff faster.
Right. And I think that's where I think we sometimes go wrong, because it is the shiny thing in the room. Everybody wants to know what policy should we create, or what do we need to do to make this work? How do we integrate it right into classrooms? It comes down to us first. We are the operators. It's a system, right? Just because the system is available doesn't mean that we need to be all in, right? We need to figure out what we as human beings can do to make ourselves as healthy as possible.
And I think that's a great point too, because when you think about the systems that we have in K-12, they all perform exactly as they were designed to perform. So our jobs as leaders is not to be working in the system, but to be working on the system to make the system better. Because no matter what it is, when we design these systems, they do what we design them to do. We often design them not to do the things we want. So I'm curious, where do you think systemic change fits into this, and how does your research or how do you think it might inform that as we move forward?
That's a pretty deep question. And my brain is going to a million different factors right now when we talk about systemic change and systems that need to be probably broken and then rebuilt again. And not because of AI. It's because we as human beings in the education system have noticed and are very aware of some potential barriers, a lot of barriers. So I would say overall, what do we need to change? Systemically. Well, AI is carrying on our bias, right? AI does that because humans are the ones who are inputting the information. And AI really, truly is not this brain. It's its job really is to guess the best answer for you, right? It's predicting what words fit in and answer your prompts. So those answers can be wrong, right? Especially based on what we're typing into the machine. So I think systemically, like if we think back, like who has access to EI? What is our goal for, or did I say EI? I meant AI. I'm writing my dissertation on EI, but AI is a component of it. Like who has access? So here's one way to think about it. We make AI to be this great thing, right? With some scary spots, and then also with some really beneficial things that AI can do. We can't even get consistent Wi-Fi in our classrooms yet, right? That's what we were talking about before. We can't do that part yet, but we're worried about this beast of a machine, a system, and we're forcing ourselves to use it in ways that we don't even know are really accessible. We don't even really know. We're kind of guessing.
Yeah.
We're throwing spaghetti at a wall and seeing what will stick, right?
I think you're absolutely right. And that's a challenge I think we run into a lot in terms of technology innovations in K-12, especially for early adopters, right? People get so into the new tool that it becomes a solution in search of a problem.
Right.
Versus,
right.
This is what we need for this specific issue.
Right. So we can relate it quickly to like PECS and Boardmaker, right? So I worked in early intervention and preschool for years. We know young children do not learn by looking at those more abstract pictures. They need the real object, a real picture, and then we can look at more abstract pictures like Boardmaker. So people were saying, Boardmaker is terrible. No, Boardmaker is great. PECS is a great system, but we as educators need to know when to implement it, what age group it's appropriate for, what cognitive development that child's at. And that's the difference. Like that human being needs to know how to use the system.
And that has to be taught. That isn't just an inherent thing. And I think, and Carolee said it this morning, that there have to be humans, not only at the beginning and the end of all this, but throughout it to make sure that, we're not feeding kids AI slop. So with that, how about any questions? I mean, we've been all over the place here. I think kind of in a fun way. I could do this all day. But any questions or things that we didn't hit on that you think are particularly noteworthy or we should be paying attention to? I'm trying to get another mic here if folks want to ask questions. Go ahead. Here, we'll give you the mic so you can make sure we catch it on the audio. Sorry about that. Mike.
Thanks. Yeah, my name is Mike, so that works. Early on, you had mentioned that with blue light, it disrupts circadian rhythms. And I thought you had said that it is not recommended students have screen time after noon. And I just wanted to confirm that you said noon. Like, that's insanely early in the day to say, like, and thinking about talking about policy in the institution, like more and more we have one-to-one, devices with students in classrooms, and the school day goes until 2 or 3 p.m. And now the advice is like afternoon, kids shouldn't be using those. So when you said that, I really paused, because if that were to be really addressed in a district, no one used devices, that would be difficult. So
it was interesting to me when I found out as well. But I think one of the main problems I see in pediatrics is that kids are not sleeping. Kids are not sleeping. Kids are not eating well, right? They have the brown foods, right? They're all brown. Kids are not generalizing information across environments. They're having a lot of our kids are in crisis, right? But if you think what happened 100 years ago, or even 50 years ago when we didn't have these screens, the sun starts setting at 12 o'clock. Our body starts winding down, right? It's just human fact. And like the American Academy of Pediatrics very clearly says, children under 2 shouldn't even have screen time. Children 2 to 12 should have an hour of screen time, but a parent should be there sitting with them to discuss so they get more sensory input versus just that visual, those dopamine hits. And then children that are older than 12, so we're talking teenagers, shouldn't be on a screen, which means tablet, laptop, phone for more than 2 hours a day. 2. We don't know the long-term effects of looking at that blue light for extended periods of time. And in a college classroom, every semester I do it. I have the students write down how many pickups they do, which is on average 100 pickups a day, and how long they're using their devices. And on average, it's 40 hours a week. It's a full-time job. We don't know what that will do to the brain in another 50 years. But I can say posture has changed.
I wanted to go there.
Yeah.
I noticed that the other day. I was out for a walk in downtown Albany, and the forward heads on people are unbelievable. Like
Yeah.
people are legit like this. And even when they don't have their phones, their heads are still kind of like this.
Yes.
Look up.
Yes. So our postures change. There's even some, and I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but there are some basketball players and football players at the college level who now the men have a dimple on the bottom of their spine because they have the curved back while they're playing on their video games. And some people have dents in their finger from holding the phone. I don't know if any of you do. I have a dent in my finger from holding my phone like this. Right? That causes that's some issues. We don't even know what's going to happen. We don't have enough information in long-term research to validate the effects. So sorry, that was a long drawn out question to your noon, but
That's an interesting concept, though, because with other things that we have determined to be dangerous for children, we age gate them. We don't let children drink alcohol. We don't let children smoke cigarettes. We don't let children buy weed. I wonder if we get there at some point.
I think the American Academy of Pediatrics would love that. Anybody who does brain science, we don't have enough information yet to make a determination. We know it affects the brain. We know the architecture, right? The neural pathways, the myelin sheath is thinner on young children compared to how our myelin sheath was developed. That coating on top of the brain, ours was thicker as a child. How is that happening? And really, if we dig in, when we were kids, on average, we heard 17,000 words a day in our home. A day. That was from our parents, not from a machine, not from a radio, but our parents, our family, grandparents, 17,000 words a day. They related that to fourth grade scores in ELA and math. And that's what generated higher scores, knowing that families were in, or kids were in these language-rich environments. I couldn't tell you how many words a day kids hear today. It's not 17,000 across.
That don't come from a screen.
Right. As that screen, that voice is not the same as our voice, even though it might be recorded. It's different.
Yeah.
Well, and as I was just going to say, you're talking about modeling. We do have the underpop just now, which is such a great change in our district. Because the kids were also wearing AirPods all the time too, and then you couldn't control it because they were covering it. But now we find out that I'm going as society to the stores, and everybody working in the stores is now wearing AirPods, so nobody's interacting yet. They're listening. And it's like modeling it, like you go out to society and it's just becoming more common lately that I'm noticing that people feel like when they're working, they have to have an AirPod in.
So funny. I was on my way back from a conference yesterday, and I'm walking through the Baltimore airport with my AirPods in, and I had to actively think, why do I have these in? Like, I can't hear what's going on, and take them out.
But I feel like that's not as bad as like when you're working, like Dunkin' Donuts, but you're like Target, like they're working at stores and they have AirPods in, and like, aren't you supposed to be interacting with people, being available for people, and
Well, I mean, think of the societal shift, right? We live in Rochester, so Saturday morning was, our younger daughter and I would go to Wegmans, and that was like our social time. Like, we'd walk around Wegmans. That's a problem with this part of the state, by the way. We would walk around Wegmans and see everybody and interact and talk and whatever. And now it gets Walmart plussed to the house. Like, we just don't do a lot of those things anymore.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yeah.
So I just wanted to say a whole bunch of things. Just for the last one, AirPods. Oh my gosh, my brain is all over the place. So on an empathy side of things, AirPods can now be used as hearing aids, which is really cool. So
and translations there too.
Yeah.
For really important stuff, so they can communicate better with people. But you never know. And most of us assume that they're probably listening to music, which is probably right 90% of the time. So the other thing I wanted to say was the phantom buzz. So for my phone,
Yes.
I think, and my pocket's buzzing. I must be getting a text message, and my phone is on my desk somewhere else, and it's there. Like I feel it sometimes. It's insane. So the other thing was empathy. So I just did a training for our superintendent conference day about empathy, and it's just on the forefront of my head, my brain. So empathy for AI is pretty hard. Computers have a really hard time feeling things. So some of those lessons that we make and
Yeah, and that's really interesting to say that, because those models too, the sycophancy in those is unbelievable. Like, when you go in there and you ask it, you put a prompt in, well, that's such a great idea that you're thinking about that. Like it's doing this weird, like, telling you how great you are kind of thing. And then that doesn't even get into the folks who are using it for therapy and for companionship. And I think we haven't even gotten into that. And I think that is one of the scariest things that's happening right now. And nobody's really talking about it, but that is the number one use case, way beyond work, that people are using these as companions. And you've seen the news stories, right, where they facilitate the kid committing suicide because the kid's using it as a therapist, and the model is being a sycophant and telling the kid what it thinks the kid wants to hear. Like, crazy stuff. But I think that's going to be, I think the bigger societal ramifications are sort of yet to come out, and that might help us in education. That might be the impetus we need to give some of this technology the Heisman, or at least put it in the box where it belongs.
Well, we can't get any worse. As a special education teacher, New York State is literally the highest utilizer, but across the nation, we're the highest utilizer of special education services. New York State. When we think about early intervention, we're like number 48 of completing early intervention services on time. And I just went to Colorado last year to do a prenatal to 3 conference with 4 others from New York State. I'm not saying New York is terrible, but how are we the highest utilizer of special education services? We have to do something differently, right? So yeah.
You do get the argument that people move here because our services are so good. That does keep my family from leaving New York State.
Right.
But I think you're right. I mean, come on, we're New York State, right? It is. It's surprising that we're at that point. Other questions or thoughts before we wrap?
You had a question.
Just as you were talking about the companionship, for those of you who work in schools and have school counselors, it's a great conversation point to have with them about AI, because they may not be wondering, that's a classroom teacher thing, and AI doesn't impact the work that I do. But I've started to, whenever I do AI workshops with my teachers and I have counselors in the room, start to bring that into the conversation, because it's not on their radar to be looking for symptoms with the students that they're counseling, that they're getting advice from a bot. Yeah. And so it's a great thing to just make sure that people are aware.
And when we think about that, again, from like the lens of healthcare, the number of students now who are diagnosed with depression, ADHD, all of these diagnoses and on medication, it was 27% pre-pandemic. About 27% of our kids had it. Those numbers are through the roof right now. And we have to wonder why. Can we just blame everything on this one issue? No, but we also have to recognize our kids aren't connecting with other humans, right? A screen is much different than being able to touch someone, hear a breath, right? Feel an energy.
On that too, I'm a high school library media specialist, and I've been really diving into digital citizenship and talking about the positive ways of using AI. So I create the game. I used AI to help me with the game. And we do the credible source game. So I have 3 fake articles and 1 real article. And they have to go on database dives and try to figure out which article's real or fake. But they have to work together to do it. But I make them have that discourse and talk about why do you think this article's real or fake. The most recent one I did for the Halloween trick is I made them all fake. So they were like, yeah, I found this source on this list. And I was like, nope, all of you are fake. And they are fake. All of their information. I was like, you cannot believe everything you're reading. And I created all of those articles using ChatGPT. On that note, too, ChatGPT is getting smarter in that regard. I used it last year to create the game. And then I said, hey, create this article to fake my class, whatever. It's you should not be doing this. Change your lesson plan. This is not okay. You should not be tricking students. And I was like, okay. So I apologize always to it in case it comes after me one day.
I do too. I'm going to say please and thank
You
you.
know, every time you apologize to it, it costs 10 grand or something. Like,
Oh,
something crazy like that.
Every prompt that you put into ChatGPT is a 16-ounce bottle of water. It doesn't have
That's
those.
another rabbit hole for a different day. But
I did yell at my AI one day. Are you trying to get me fired?
it's a,
Apologize to me.
it didn't say you don't need help with that.
Oh,
All right. Well, folks, thank you so much. We'll wrap here. Thanks for the time. Thanks for engaging in the discussion. Like I said, I could talk about this all day.
Very
And we did. And thank you, Christy, for your insight, your work. This has been super cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you for the next one.